welcome to Conservation Fridays, where nature meets neighbor. I'm Jamie Lewis Hedges.
And I'm Rachel Frantz. Today, we are honored to have Christine Charles with us, a dedicated professional with an extensive background in sustainable agriculture, ecological farming, and soil health. Nearly 2 years ago, Christine began the role of Extension Educator for field crops and regenerative agriculture at Michigan State University Extension. Christine works with farmers, educators, researchers, and organizational partners to promote and enhance regenerative practices in agricultural, such as enhancing soil health and climate resilience while maintaining focus on profitability. She also serves on KBS's Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Her varied background includes positions in soil science research at Ohio State University and Purdue University, working as a Student Soil Trainee at USDA NRCS, and with the U.S. Forest Service. During her time at graduate school, she co-instructed several courses in Geographic Information Systems, GIS, soil sciences, Wildland Fire Management, and Ecological Engineering and Science. Each role has demonstrated her comprehensive understanding of soil health, conservation practices, and sustainable farming. Today, it is her expertise in farming, ecological sustainability, and profitability that we are eager to learn from. Join us today as we glean insights from her experiences in dynamic intersection of agriculture, research, and community engagement. Welcome, Christine. It's a pleasure to have you on Conservation Fridays.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a wildly generous introduction, so I appreciate being here.
We sabotaged Rachel with a lot of technical words packed into one bio. You did good.
Thank you.
Well, Christine, I'm really eager to discuss farming sustainability, both ecological and economic impacts with you, as well as your work with Michigan State University Extension. But before we dive in, I want to take another moment to invite everyone here to order native bare root trees at your local conservation district at your tree sale. Tree sales are the main earned income of conservation districts around the state of Michigan. And now is the time of year for most spring tree sale orders. So if you're looking at landscaping and improving the quality of backyard habitat on your property, we encourage you to support your local conservation district. For Berry County, I'm getting choked up, find our tree sale at berrycd.org/trees. Rachel?
So, Christine, we'd like to get to know you personally a little bit. Can you tell us about yourself, separate from the very long introduction that I just gave? Who are you?
Yeah, well, I am an East Coast transplant to the Midwest. I am originally from New Jersey, but I've made the Midwest and specifically Michigan home for the past few years. I would say I'm a pretty curious person who loves to share what I find out. So I really love being in a role where I can learn from researchers, from farmers, from folks that I work with, and then also just share that out. I'd also say I'm forever a student of the soil. So I feel like I'm constantly learning new things from the soil and the environment around me. And yeah, I also the daughter of farm kids, but not a farm kid myself. I did not grow up on the farm, but both of my parents did and left it. So when I said I wanted to go into the world of agriculture and conservation, they were like, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
So you said it there when you were interested in getting into conservation. Can you kind of take that episode in your life and blow it up a little bit for us? Give us, more of the story of what got you into conservation work and brought you into this interest.
Right. I think for most people, really influential adults and teachers make a huge difference on what they get interested in. This is true for me. So I didn't grow up on a farm at all, but when I was in high school, I got really interested in agriculture and food systems and composting. And so I had a Miss Frizzle-esque teacher in my life who was totally on board with letting me and my friends explore this intellectual curiosity and try out this stuff, and going to small farms conferences that she would find for us in the area. And I think that was the first time I really saw agriculture as a career. So that was opened up a whole new world for me, and I was very excited about it. And originally, like I said, my parents were very skeptical of my interest, and they kind of assumed that I, had this pastoral view that I was going to, live out on a farm and it was going to be beautiful. And I didn't know the reality of it because they grew up on a farm, and granted, I didn't. But eventually they became really supportive as, we learned more about what was available in the world of agricultural careers. And it wasn't until I went to college that I took a soil science class, and I fell head over heels in love with soil science research and how farms are a part of a broader system, how soils interactions kind of apply to so many dynamics that we see on the farm and in our environment, and how much soil can guide your success in farming. So that intersection is where I wanted to be career-wise, at effective agronomy and farming well and productively, with environmental conservation in mind, soils in mind, and how soils kind of guide those two factors.
That is so awesome. I've always been interested in soil. I've never taken any soil science classes, but I know generally soil scientists don't like it when I say I love dirt. I love the smell of dirt, and I know dirt's the wrong word, but that's how I've always known it. And I've decomposing wood and just the process of becoming soil. Like, I've always been very interested in that. But to segue a little bit, but there may be some people in our audience that don't know about Michigan State Extension and the WK, and I'm not sure what that stands for, but I always just call it the Kellogg Biological Station.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us more about what those two organizations are and kind of what their relationship is?
Sure. Yeah. So Michigan State University Extension is the educational outreach arm of Michigan State University to the community. So Extension provides information and educational programs around a wide variety of topics related to agriculture and agribusiness, the environment, children and youth, health and nutrition, the local governments, and community food systems, to name a few. So Extension is a one-stop shop for community outreach and education. And so Extension services actually exist in every state in the US. Extension is a really cool system in that way, thanks to federal legislation that was passed in 1915. And the goal of this legislation was so that universities can extend their educational missions and resources, specifically the land-grant universities extending their resources and educational missions beyond the campuses themselves and into the wider community, especially agricultural communities. So that's kind of where Extension started, is extending these research, educational resources into agricultural communities, but it's expanded to so much more, right? As our communities have shifted, as our needs have shifted, as our resources have grown, Extension embodies a lot more. So the Kellogg Biological Station, or KBS, is one of Michigan State's off-campus research stations. So they're located in Berry County in Hickory Corners. And the site itself was donated to Michigan State University in 1927 from the Kellogg family. So it's really cool. The manor is preserved. So this used to be the Kellogg family, the cereal magnates, vacation home. So that's kind of a cool space to work. And so research projects at the station focus on aquatic and terrestrial ecology in a diverse range of systems that are either managed or unmanaged. Managed meaning farm systems, right? Like farmscapes. And the station continues to offer, courses for students, so students can come out here and work or take classes for the summer. And then also year-round outreach programs to the general public, right? We have the bird sanctuary and, host all sorts of field days and events to connect people directly to the research going on here. How they connect. So most extension educators are based out of county offices. And while I, pop into county offices every once in a while, I am mainly based out of this station, in order to best share this research and help translate this research into extension materials and connect folks to the research station itself. So that's kind of what they are and how they connect.
You said popped in the office, and that was literally how we met. I think I was a month or 2 months in here, and you had popped into our office here at Berry Conservation District, and we chatted for a while. And after that, I looked up your bio and was reading on there, and you used this phrase that captured my attention, quote, seeing the farm as an ecosystem. And as soon as I read that, I'm like, all right, we've got to talk to Christine, because my background is in general ecology. I grew up on a farm in Indiana. We've talked about Indiana. You've got experience there at Purdue. And I grew up on my grandfather's farm. And one thing that I know really clearly from that experience is that as a farmer, you're strapped and you're really trying hard to make ends meet. You're, maybe one of the single most captivating things on your brain is how to make ends meet and how to get that profit. And now being in conservation work, trying to, square that circle of being profitable in a environmentally sustainable way. So I really wanted to get your take on all that. But if you could start off first for those who are with us today or listening, what do you mean when you say the farm as an ecosystem? What does that mean? What does that look like at a street level basic understanding?
Right. Yeah. And to contextualize this, seeing the farm as an ecosystem, I think, is one of many ways that you can view farming. And I just think it's one that really resonates with me and that I approach. So not everyone might like or see their farm in this way, but I think it's a helpful tool. So let's first start off with what the definition of an ecosystem is. So ecosystems are communities of organisms that interact with each other and their surrounding environment. So when people think of an ecosystem, they're often thinking of maybe like freshwater lakes or streams and who all lives there and the rocks and the vegetation there, or something like a forest. But we typically don't see farms as an ecosystem when we are listing off types of ecosystems in our head. No matter how you farm, your farm is an ecosystem, right? All the aspects of a farm, like the crops, the soil, the rain, the insects, the farmer, are a community of living and non-living organisms that are constantly interacting. And so when you see the farm as an ecosystem, it helps shift the perspective on our approach to agriculture. So instead of seeing the farm as a linear equation or farming as a linear equation, right? So where seeds plus time in the field plus fertilizer equals, your yield, your harvestable crop, you can start to see and account for how the farm is more of a dynamic system. And we can ask ourselves, what are the different aspects of the system and how are they engaging with each other? And so not everything translates directly, but there's a lot of interesting stuff we can learn from ecosystem management that we can take into farming and farming management too. So some of the pillars like systems thinking that people use in ecosystem management. So there's no single factor alone that our energy and focus goes to. So we're not thinking solely on yield, solely on soil health, or solely on profitability or biodiversity. All of these are a part of a systems mindset when we're approaching our decision making. Another pillar that I think translates really well from ecosystem management to farming is adaptive management. So you're constantly reevaluating your management. Management is an iterative process, and you're approaching something differently once you have new information, either about your environment itself, the ecosystem, or just generally. So again, I don't think that this approach makes you a better or worse steward of your land, but I think it's an interesting perspective and invites a lot of diversity of thought and management styles into our thoughts around farming.
Definitely. So what challenges do you see here in Southwest Michigan for the farmers? Like, I know you said that it's not just one thing, but I feel like for a lot of farmers, it is the profitability, the yield that is their, their bottom line. So as far as regenerative farming and being more sustainable in agriculture, what is really on the line for these farmers, and what are they gambling with? Is it they're going to spend too much time, or what exactly, I guess, happens if we don't move in a more sustainable farming direction?
Sure. And, I am coming from a field crops perspective, so I do think that there are some nuances with maybe fruit, veg, and greenhouse systems that I won't be hitting on. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing are these variable weather patterns, right? Whether or not you believe in climate change, that doesn't concern me, but how rain is showing up now is really different than it was 10, 15 years ago, right? We're staying wetter for longer in the fall, right? They were pushing those ability and amount of time to get into field to harvest back later. That can leave us vulnerable to more compaction and, just lower quality crops in general. We're getting a lot of rain also in the springs as well. Those fall and spring rains are really inconvenient for farming. That's when we need to get in the field. And then more frequently, we're seeing a drier summer. So during that growth period. So farming around new weather patterns is a huge challenge, especially in Southwest Michigan, where we see a lot more lighter ground, right? So we're nowhere near similar to some place like Iowa, where they're starting off with a lot more organic matter, or a very different soil system than the soil system that we're starting off with here. And so farming, no matter what you do, is going to shift that. And so we're starting off with less room, less margin for error. And when we have these factors to farm around that are making it harder to hit that great yields or great, timeline, amount of work in field, it's going to become more difficult. So that's a huge challenge, is working around that, navigating that, becoming resilient to that. Some other challenges that are, things to think about are new expectations from both companies and our communities, right? So we're having a lot of expectations around conservation practices that need to be in the ground, whether or not it's for environmental stewardship. There's a lot of money incentive to, participate in maybe these ecosystem service markets or new contract expectations for certain folks to use certain practices. Another expectation that's floating around is your data management and manipulation, right? We're pushing so far into a world where if you're farming and you don't have a good idea of what the data of your farm is, then you're behind. And so that is a really interesting challenge and expectation that people are going to have to become accustomed to in the coming years.
So Christine, after on the other side of this break, we want to ask you about soil health in particular. You were touching on that right there, and we'd like to get a little bit more into that and some of those solutions. But we're going to take a break right now, and this is Conservation Fridays.
All right. So let's take another moment to invite you to order native bare root trees at your local conservation district tree sale. Tree sales are the main earned income of conservation districts around the state of Michigan, and now is the time for most spring tree sale orders. If you're looking at landscaping and improving the quality of your backyard habitat on your property, we want to encourage you to support your local conservation district. For Berry County, find our tree sale at berrycd.org/trees.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, Christine, getting back to some of those challenges and what farmers can do to face those. We talk a lot about soil health in extension and conservation district world, um, and investing in those soil health practices contribute to long-term profitability for farmers. How is that true, and or is that true? Did I represent that correctly? And are there specific soil management techniques that you recommend for achieving this?
Right. Yeah, soil health, I think, is, as I've heard from several folks, especially farmers who've been practicing it for a while, it's an investment more than it is an immediate payoff, right? So improving soil health is what helps buffer those big swings. It's not what's going to bump your yield in this next year, right? It's making sure that you can infiltrate the extra water that you're getting or hold on to it for a little bit longer in those dry patches, not immediately add to what your crop has available nutrient wise, for example. So there are for sure long-term benefits, and stabilizing, right? Stabilizing what you can expect yield wise is a huge factor in long-term sustainability of your farm, and economic sustainability is what I'm talking about here. When you can reliably depend on that yield. And so that's where soil health can contribute on both of those fronts. Now, this isn't to say that pursuing soil health or shifting your management isn't going to be a struggle or isn't going to impact your yield, because it probably will, especially in those first couple of years. So I don't want to construe anyone's perception of management changes all of a sudden, like making everything hunky-dory. There's lots of things to overcome. For example, figuring out the timing of getting in the field with cover crops, or what those nutrient cycles are with cover crops. There's a possibility of tying up nitrogen earlier on in the season if you're not able to terminate fast enough. And a lot of that stuff has to do with what works well for your farm, what timing works out well. Some folks really struggle to make no-till work, especially the northern part of Michigan. As farther north we go, the harder it is for no-till to work because of how cold it gets, the need to warm up soil with tillage. Not to say that it doesn't work, but there's a longer time frame of struggles that you might face yield-wise before you get that stabilized system. And a lot of people don't have the ability or desire to wait that long with something like a no-till scenario in those parts of the region. Now, in our area, Southwest, no-till can work out pretty well for a lot of folks because we do have the soils that can handle that. We're not holding on to water as tightly if you're on a less, soils with less clay and things like that. So again, the long-term investment of practices that help with improving soil health ultimately helps stabilize your farm system. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about how soil health can help with things economically.
That's really interesting. I think about a lot about, I know very little about agriculture, so I hope that I don't sound too silly, but I see a lot of fields that are not rotated. And I wonder about just having, we'll say corn, because that's what I see the most. And when I worked in Grand Rapids, I would drive by the same farms day after day, year after year, and they're consistently having corn. And I'm under the impression that not rotating crops, is crop rotation something that would fall into a sustainable practice like no-till?
Absolutely. Yeah. Crop rotation, one, allows you to have some economic and market diversity. So that's like a huge consideration when you're thinking about your long-term economic sustainability as a farm, right? You're not dependent on one commodity for your markets if those things swing. And in terms of biodiversity and all of the impacts that vegetative biodiversity have on our soil system and our larger farm systems is huge. So Guelph University in Canada finds that if you're wanting to improve your soil health quickly, so improve the soil aggregation and the amount of organic matter you have in your soil, adding wheat to the rotation is probably your best bet to do that. So it does that more quickly than something like cover crops, which was surprising to me. But wheat gives you also an opportunity to add in other practices like a cover crop because you're harvesting a lot sooner in the season. But yeah, those crop rotations are really important for economic reasons, biodiversity reasons. And then also when we think about the crop itself, crop health and diseases, pest management, being able to break up those cycles is really important. So when you're doing one crop over time, you make your system vulnerable to the same diseases, the same pests. When you have those different rotations, you're able to break up those vulnerabilities, right? You might invite different types of insects, or the same diseases aren't going to affect the soybean crop in the way that it would a corn crop, in the way that it would, a wheat crop. So those disease cycles, those insect cycles, right, that is really important to consider when we're thinking about those crop rotations. So there's multiple benefits and aspects that crop rotations can be a huge benefit when we think about regenerative or conservation and things like that.
Awesome. So how really do you strike a balance then between trying to be sustainable while still, having a profit? And do you have any specific strategies or principles that you find are particularly effective with kind of making that shift into that transition?
Yeah, I think that viewing things from a profitability standpoint as opposed to a yield standpoint helps. So you improve your profitability on a farm either by improving your income, or you decrease your costs. And a lot of conservation practices, especially up front, the goal is to decrease costs. And in some cases, you are increasing your income by improving yield, right? So like oftentimes corn sees a yield bump after wheat, or after several years, people see yield improvements with cover crops incorporated. So, but more directly, those conservation practices should, in some aspect, decrease costs on one front. So viewing farm decisions around how those management choices are impacting overall profitability, so your cost per acre versus your per acre profit, helps in understanding what might work and how things are changing over time. So, for example, if you are thinking about, putting cover crops in, and I've heard this from a bunch of folks, in their experience with cover crops, you're not going to do it all on all your fields at once. You're wanting to make sure that it works for you. So to determine what field might be less risky to try something new out on, you might want to try a field where you're less profitable, right? Like you're not yielding as well. So you can, there's more need in that field to either improve yield or improve some sort of system aspect. And there's maybe more expense that's going in, right? You're putting more inputs and time into this field that's not, yielding as readily. So experimenting like those per acre or per yield profitability understandings can help pick where to start, like what field to start out on, where in your system you should start out on. Another way it helps is even in lower yielding situations, you might still be making a profit, and sometimes a greater profit. So in the long-term agroecosystem research site, we're finding that in the treatment that has all this suite of conservation practices, is not yielding as highly as the treatment that has the business as usual practices. So the business as usual was just survey data from farmers in our area. But in the first year, which was very surprising to me, there was higher profitability across both the corn and the soybeans planted in those stacked conservation treatment plots. And the reason largely wasn't because we were improving yield. We weren't improving yield, we decreased yield, but we were decreasing our input costs. And so that perspective of overall profitability when you're making these transitions, even though you're not hitting maybe those same yield metrics, is still important in order to see that something is working or you're making progress. So keeping those things in mind could be a great way to hold the profitability and ecological sustainability questions in the same conversation, hold them together.
That makes a lot of sense. What about one of the things I'm thinking about is when I was a kid and watched my grandfather out in the fields, and he had a John Deere harvester that at the time it was even old for the time. And then I went to work as a young man for another farmer that had a lot more acreage, and we went to the equipment shows and checked out what was available, and that was when automatic pilot GIS driven harvesters were coming out, these massive pieces of equipment. And nowadays I was just reading some stories about AI coming into how we're going about harvesting our fields or working our fields. So the thing that I wonder about in these conversations is how does technology fit into that piece that you're talking about? And are there specific tools or innovations that you see as particularly promising?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Well, one thing's for sure, technology is changing really, really fast, and those companies are coming out with new add-ons all the time. So I might not be the most well-versed to let you know, like, okay, these are the add-ons you gotta buy or download or things like that. But technology-wise, being able to keep track of your data, either if you're operating in a system that does that for you, or if you're able to do that on your own. So how much you're putting on of each input, or your fertilizers, your pesticides, how much yield you have for field. If you're able to do that per acre, so able to take those maps that some of the yield monitoring systems or some of these John Deere my John Deere operations centers, they have all of this information. If you're able to keep track of that over time, that is going to be huge in terms of how you can make decisions that are more precise and best suited to your farm and field. So beyond like the specific downloads, the specific add-ons, it's the data itself and keeping track of that and referring to that over time that's going to be the most promising. So one of the partner farmers that we work with at the research site does this really well. It's like a big data guy, and was able to determine what parts of his field where his equation was telling him to not plant any seeds. Like, stop planting seeds here. It is not yielding high enough. You are losing money planting these areas. So those are the areas that he chose to put into a conservation strip or prairie strip and take out of production, and then enter into a contract with NRCS and then get money that way. Now, is that going to work for everyone? Is that everyone's desire? Maybe not, but I think that that sort of information is really important to have in your back pocket. Where maybe do you not to need to invest all of the inputs, right? I think there's a belief that if you put more time and energy into an area that's really not doing well, then you can build it back up, and you just need to nurse the crop a little bit more, but maybe you're wasting way more money on that side of the field. And so considering like those areas more seriously, more deliberately in terms of what you invest your time and inputs into is something that data can give you. Another thing, these variable rates attributes of planters and, spreaders and things like that, that is going to also be incredibly helpful in terms of our resource management over time, right? So if you can show that you are being more efficient with how you're applying and using your inputs, further on down the line, if you're interested in these kinds of markets, or if someone someone wants a contract with your crop, or like seed corn folks might face this of, well, what is your resource management like, right? What are your inputs like? And you can show that you are being adaptive to what your land actually needs, what your crop actually needs. That'll be a huge benefit for you. So any ability or opportunity you have to collect that data, to look back at it and use it over time. So it's never 1 year of data that's going to tell you the story of your field. It's that over time, look back, sitting down with all of the information that you do have and deciding, what do I do next? That is how technology is being used on the back end, right? Like all of these programs and tools, those are the calculations that they're making, right? How does this work over time? Now, at MSU, you can work with Professor Bruno Basso. He does research specifically on this and then makes you historical profitability maps. So if you do have this information that you've been collecting for a long time and you're not sure what to do with it, you can, approach his lab and they'll do this for free, where they'll kind of like pile on all of these yield maps over time, pile on all of your, profit acres over time, and then give you back what is your per acre profitability area. So what areas are losing money more frequently than others. So I think that's a really neat tool, and I think that'll turn into something maybe more widely available down the line once they get that research nailed down. I think another thing too, where again, I kind of referenced these markets, things to keep track of, and a tool that I think is interesting to experiment with and use is one by Field to Market. So their FieldPrint platform is an online platform where you can enter in, your management plan, and it's all anonymous, right? You don't have to, they're not reporting it anywhere. Well, I should say for context, Field to Market is a collective of different parts of the supply chain with agriculture. And so they're a collaborative that kind of gets all of these needs from buyers and processors and farmers and things like that. And how do we make this whole system work better? One of the things they're working on is being able to develop more ecosystem service markets, or what do these ecosystem service markets look like? What can people expect? So this FieldPrint platform allows, a landowner or farmer to go in, list off all of their management choices and kind of what their schedule is like, what kinds of inputs are they putting in at what rate and which fields. And then it'll give you a comparison of how you rank in terms of greenhouse gas emissions based on an equation. Again, this is not exact science, but based on, estimates and an equation in comparison to your state and then nationally. So are you on average more efficient with your greenhouse gas use in your state, or less efficient? Are you really efficient when it comes to soil health metrics based on these equation metrics on what you put in? So something nice, I think, to have in your back pocket. If you're saying, on average, I'm doing better on this, and this than the country and the state, and being able to look for markets or people who will pay you for that, right? So cool exercise, I think, to make your data work for you, or make your information and your practices work for you in a larger landscape.
Definitely. I mean, I love data. I love tools that use your data. That's just like so exciting. But we're getting near the end, so I just want to ask one final question. What 3 specific things can the average farmer do right now in our area to improve both sustainability, and we'll throw in soil health too, because it's so important, and their profitability, and stutter all day until now?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, what is your per acre cost of production and your per acre net profits? Maybe you want to do that as an average of your whole farm, but I think even more revealing is by field, right? So knowing those numbers can really empower you to make management choices that are going to be more profitable, or give you that longer term stability over time, or help you in those fields that specifically need it, instead of pouring more money or inputs in to solve a problem. I think to start, if you're not already starting to keep those records of inputs and what management is changing, if you have grandparents or parents who have been keeping those, have a little notebook with them constantly, get that into an Excel sheet. I mean, that's a gold mine. Maybe it was neurotic to some, but that is priceless. So if you're able to collect that data over time and be able to make management choices, that'll help you become more stable. If you're starting to see bigger and bigger swings with what yields you can get, maybe there's something you can do to help buffer those swings. I think in terms of soil health considerations, walking a field or two, I think especially now is a great opportunity to do so. We're not in the fields planting yet, but we are seeing a lot of impact from those late harvesting times, right? So people weren't able to get in as early as they needed to. So maybe you're seeing a lot of ruts in your field or compaction, or maybe you didn't notice and, it's in a further back part of the field, right? So what are those things that are starting to show up right now that might not be as visible once you get your crop in the ground and things like that? So maybe there are areas that you might want to focus on and address differently than what you typically would. So I think those would be my top suggestions. And then, of course, check out your conservation district or NRCS office for your program options and cost share opportunities. There's people who want to give you money to do stuff.
That's right. That's on point. Because the next thing I'm going to ask you, Christine, is about recommended resources, FMI resources for more information that you might have on this. I can't stress enough what you were saying about data, though there's a lot of value here, I think, for people who are listening. One of the things that many people may not know that we do in conservation work is how much time and effort we put into trying to find data and roll it into the project plans and work that the solutions that we're putting on the ground. And so I think that's a really important piece to put there. And I like how you just put together the looking for the data on the one hand and putting boots on the ground and just walking your fields on the other. I think putting together those two pieces of the the technology, the data, the higher aspects of work, mental work that we do, together with just being out there on the ground in nature and seeing what's going on. And I think that's really important. What are some specific places that you would send people for more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So MSU Extension has several articles and bulletins. So articles come out very frequently and respond to, things that we're seeing in the field, maybe problems that we're hearing about. You can look back and kind of search through what, other resources we have from previous years and, larger bulletins. So we have a great bulletin about cover crop termination, right? We didn't get the hard winter freeze that we were, maybe expecting to kill off some of our cover crops. So now that our cover crops aren't winter killed, how are we going to terminate it? Well, we have a guide for that available online. Another great resource would be the Midwest Cover Crop Council. So if you are new or you've been experimenting and using cover crops for a while and want to see what other options there might be for you, the Cover Crop Selector tool, I think, is really beneficial to see what would work in your area based on, your county's average weather patterns, and what would work based on goals. So it allows you to put in key goals that you have, and then it'll come up with a whole list of cover crop species that would fit into your management window and really hit those goals that you're trying to get out of cover crops. Another resource that I basically use as Google is the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education website, SARE. So SARE provides grants to both farmers and researchers and agricultural professionals to do their own research or host their own events. And they are required to, publish that back out into bulletins and resources and books. And so if there's a farmer that tried something really innovative, and they got a SARE grant, all of the research and resources on that is on their website. They have great videos from their conferences that get posted on there, books. So Using Cover Crops Profitably is a book that I often reference and go back to get a good idea of like, okay, so what considerations do I need to make around those? They have a great bulletin, so like a shorter document that I can send the link to you for, that is economics and cover crops. So just a really quick guide, what are the top 7 situations where you're going to make a huge or a pretty big economic shift in, your operation in using cover crops? Typically, we need a long time for cover crops to become profitable or provide that stability, but there are scenarios where you're going to see that benefit in a short amount of time. What are they? How do you navigate that and implement cover crops in a way that's profitable? So I think their resources are great. And then on the Soil Health Nexus is a group of universities across the northern Midwest that, focus in on and share out soil health resources and trainings. So this resource is kind of geared towards maybe agronomists or conservation professionals, or farmers who are advising other farmers and are kind of interested in how to do that sort of education and training and conversation. They do monthly webinars on like the newest topic in research. So if you're wanting to stay up to date, subscribe to their webinar list. And then they also have a toolbox for conservation practices and economics. So all sorts of resources and, case studies on various practices in conservation. How are people making it work? What does not work? And I think that that's just such a great place to start hunting around if you're looking for how to learn more.
Okay, I guess I lied. I have one more question. Do you have any upcoming events that you would like to share?
Yeah, so this is a weird season of planning. So we have a ton of winter events and then a ton of summer and fall events. So we're in the middle of getting our act together with those summer and spring events. So the best way to keep track of what comes out in this upcoming season is to subscribe to our MSU Extension newsletters, and you'll get the most recent updates of those events that are coming out, articles, and all of what I've listed. Another thing that is starting very, very soon that I would recommend everybody who's interested in field crops and getting those updates is the virtual breakfast series. So the field crops team every week from March to October has an hour-long, conversation and update on what's going on. So we have experts talk for 15 minutes it's from 7 to 8 a.m., 15 minutes in the morning, and then get a weather update for 15 minutes. And then there's a 30-minute period for question and answers. So all of our specialists from campus are tuned in, and, you can kind of throw out any question out there and someone might know the answer and be able to guide you. You can get RUP credits from it. You can get CCA credits from it. Again, I think it's a great resource to have. And, as you're getting ready to start your day throughout this season, and you can sign up online on our website. So that's, if you Google MSU Extension Virtual Breakfast, you'll find the site.
That's awesome. Thank you for all those resources. We will make those available down in the show notes when we post this out. Our next upcoming project is we will be talking with Addie Myers. She is the Michigan Department of Natural Resource Fisheries biologist. We'll be talking to her about fish and aquatic organism habitat on March 15th right here. So please join us. And Rachel.
Yeah. Christine, thank you so much for joining us today. I will definitely need to reach out and talk some more. And if you can send all those resources, I would love it. Or I'll just go back and watch and write them all down. So thank you again for joining us and for sharing your knowledge. And I just really did learn a lot. We appreciate it.
Thanks
Thanks,
so much
Christine.
for having me. Yeah.
Have a good rest of your day, all.